Welcome to the Therapy and Prayer podcast. Here you'll find the intersection between faith and mental health. I'm your host, Camille. I'm a licensed therapist and clinical social worker, but more importantly, I'm a Christian who really loves the Lord. And I'm just trying to navigate this life without falling victim to it, just like everyone else. Here we take a faith-based approach to all things mental health and wellness, because the Bible tells us to guard our heart and mind, and sometimes we need a little bit of help with that. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Therapy and Prayer podcast. My name is Camille. I'm your host. I'm so glad that you're here. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. You made it through half of the week and you're going to finish out strong. I can just feel it. Something in my spirit tells me that you're going to finish out the week strong. I hope that y'all are doing well, and I hope that we are ready to do some introspection today. I'm excited about our topic today, just because I feel like it's something that has been talked about a lot, but it's kind of become like a trendy buzzword kind of thing. And I think that's given us an unrealistic expectation of ourselves. So we're going to spend some time really digging into this topic today. We're talking about self-care. We're talking about self-care, and it relates to everybody because everyone has a self and every self needs some care, you know? But it's kind of become a buzzword over the years, and there are a lot of different feelings about it, especially in the era of hustle culture and productivity pressure and just all grind, no sleep, all of that and all the perfectionism. Where does the conversation about rest and self-care come into play? All this stuff about you sleep when you're dead and sleep is for the weak. Where does that actually come from? And I think that we really need to dismantle some of that so that we can just give ourselves the space to exist and be human beings, but also because our life is not only supposed to be about work. That was never the design. And I think that society has kind of put it into that perspective where life is really just all about work and about what you can produce. And it's fine to have goals and be ambitious. I'm pretty ambitious myself, I would say, but when those goals and ambitions take so much of your time and energy, then we don't actually have enough energy to pour into the other areas of our life that are equally important. So we're going to talk about self-care today from the perspective of taking care of the whole self. And we're going to talk about how it plays into our spiritual walk as well. As Christians, a lot of time we struggle with this concept because we are taught that we're supposed to be servants and we're supposed to serve other people, right? So our life is supposed to be about others and not about ourselves. So sometimes we feel selfish for taking care of ourselves and prioritizing our own needs. How are we supposed to be servants like Christ was if we are focusing on what we need instead of on what others need? The short answer is you cannot give to anyone else if you don't give to yourself. If your cup is empty, where are you pouring from? So we're going to get into all of that today. I'm looking forward to it. So the first thing that we need to understand immediately is that we are all humans and humans need rest. I know it sounds pretty simple. It sounds pretty elementary. But when we actually sit and think about what we expect of ourselves and how we expect ourselves to just be able to keep going without tending to our needs, we have these superhuman expectations of ourselves. And so immediately, let's get that out of here. You are a human being, I am a human being, every other person on this planet is a human being. And we have a limited capacity, which means that we need rest and we have to tend to all of our needs. So immediately, let's go ahead and get that one deep in your spirit, okay? You're not superhuman. No one else is superhuman. And so there's nothing weak about needing to rest, about needing to take care of yourself, because self-care is about more than just rest, even though that is a big part of it. And truthfully, that's one of the misconceptions that we're going to kind of get into about self-care, is that it's really only talked about in one way or from one perspective, but it's about way more than just that. But one of the reasons that we shy away from this concept of rest is because we feel like we shouldn't need it, or we feel like we have to earn it. And neither of those are true. God knows that we're human. He made us human. He knows that we need rest. He expects us to need to rest. So this whole expectation of being able to just have an endless supply of energy, I'm not sure where it came from, because even Jesus rested, okay? But we somehow have fallen into the trap. You know what? Capitalism, that's where it comes from. Don't get me started. That's where it comes from. But God expects us to get weary because he knows that we have a limited capacity. So let's normalize that for a bit. Let's normalize needing rest and normalize needing to take care of yourself. If you need to take care of other people. If other people need to be taken care of, then why don't you need to be taken care of? That's part of that superhuman expectation that we have of ourselves, that we don't need to be taken care of like other people do. But like, friend, why not? So I like to break self-care down into two different categories. We have preventative and restorative self-care. Generally, when we hear the term self-care, we think of things that fall into the restorative category. We think about going on vacation, taking some time off of work, maybe go and get a pedicure, or go travel somewhere. And these things are wonderful. They're great. These are the things that we do in order to refill our cup when we feel drained and when we feel exhausted. The thing is, if that is the only time that you're tending to your own needs, that can't happen very often. You can only take so much vacation, okay? You only got so much PTO. We can only buy so many plane tickets. And so while that type of self-care is necessary, it's not always as accessible to us. And this is why preventative self-care is so necessary. Now, preventative self-care is all of the ways that we need to take care of ourselves on an ongoing basis so that we can avoid that burnout, or at the very least, slow it down. And I am very intentional about using that terminology, taking care of yourself, because that's an ongoing thing. It's not only something that you do when you're in crisis mode or when you've hit that brick wall. It's something that you have to do every day, ongoing. So I want to make that distinction very clear. Restorative self-care is a response to burnout. That's a responsive thing. Preventative self-care is proactive. These are things that you need to do to stay well, to slow down or avoid that burnout altogether. If the only time you're paying attention to yourself is when you're on the brink of a breakdown, then you're not really taking care of yourself. You're just doing crisis control. A lot of people feel like self-care is not a priority, or that it can't be a priority because it takes too much time. It's not convenient. And because we're typically thinking about that restorative type of self-care where you do have to take time out. Maybe you're going to get a massage. You don't have time or space to do that every week or every month. You don't have the time, space, or resources to go on vacation every 2 weeks. So we don't always have an extra hour or 30 minutes to meditate every single day. Like, especially if you have kids, depending on all of what you have on your plate, we don't always have extra chunks of time. And so if we are only thinking about self-care in that way, then it's not going to feel very accessible to us, or it's going to feel like a luxury almost and not a necessity. But also, especially depending on what you have on your plate, we feel like there are so many other like way more important things, right? If you have kids, then what they need is always going to trump what you need. And maybe if you're like a high-powered executive, there are way more important things than this quote unquote self-care that we're always talking about, right? We're busy people. You've got important things happening. I know you do. And we just don't have the space, right? And it feels like it's optional, maybe. So here's why it's not. We've all heard the term like you can't pour from an empty cup. And that really is true. But my favorite analogy for self-care is imagine that you are a teapot. And as the teapot, you're pouring into multiple cups all at once, right? You've got a family cup, you've got a work cup, you've got a friend cup, you've got a spiritual cup, you've got a mental cup, you've got a physical cup, all of that. And some of these cups have like little mini cups in it, right? The family one can be your kids, your parents, your spouse, all of that. You are constantly pouring into all these different areas of your life. Now, of course, naturally, if you keep pouring into all of these cups without refilling, you're going to be empty, and then you can't pour into any of them. And then it feels like everything is just going to kind of crash and burn. So you can wait until it's empty and then refill and start pouring again. That's that restoration, that restorative self-care. Or what would happen if like periodically you just kind of topped off what was in the teapot, what was in the kettle, if you just like topped it off so that you could keep pouring. Now, every once in a while, you probably would want to like empty it out, rinse it out, get some fresh tea in there. Sure. So it's always good to have some of that restorative self-care, but it doesn't always have to be when we're in a crisis, when we can do those things. We can plan for it. You can know that you've got a vacation coming up in 4 months, and you can think about, what do I need to do to take care of myself between now and those 4 months? So we want to think about this preventative self-care like you're always refilling that teapot, so then you don't really run out. And you can continue pouring into all of those cups for longer than if you just keep pouring without refilling. And that helps a lot of us to think about self-care, because sometimes we need to think about other people and we're just not used to thinking about ourselves, and it feels very selfish. I don't believe that self-care is selfish. It's not. But if that is how you feel about it, then think about it in these terms. How can you keep giving to other people in your life if you have nothing else to give? How can you keep giving to all these important things if you have nothing else to give? So think about helping yourself as helping other people. Maybe that'll help some of us. Okay, so remember all those different cups that we're pouring into? Think about those as all the different areas of wellness in your life. Remember I said that we're going to take a holistic approach to self-care, which means that we are addressing all the different components of wellness. So there are 8 different types of rest that we need, which means that there are 8 different types of wellness. And those are physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, environmental, recreational, and professional. Okay, hold on. I know that sounds overwhelming, that there are all these different areas of wellness that we need to tend to, but we're going to talk about that in a second, because you're not necessarily giving to all of them all at once. Okay, so just hold on. We're okay. I know that was a lot, but it's okay. We typically only think about the first three or four of those that I listed, right? We think about physical, mental, emotional, and maybe spiritual wellness. But there are all these other elements of our life, other things that contribute really greatly and that we give energy to all the time. Think about it like all the different categories that you give your energy to, right? Maybe that's a better way of thinking about it, instead of like, these are all the areas of wellness that you need to tend to all the time. Think about, where does your energy go? It goes to your relationships. It goes to taking care of your home and taking care of your space. It goes to work. It goes to hobbies. So your energy is going to all these different places, which means that there's some maintenance maybe that we want to do to make sure that we're okay and that we're at our best as much as we can be in each of those areas at any given time. Now, since we're really only thinking about like 3 or 4 of these areas of wellness, what that also means is that at the same time, we're neglecting about 3 or 4 of these areas of wellness. Not intentionally, but because we're not used to thinking about it in that way, we're neglecting some of our needs. And this isn't your fault, but it probably has something to do with being on autopilot. We all know what that feels like, where you're just kind of like going through the motions, right? Because that's just what you do. But when you catch yourself on autopilot and you look up and it's like, how did I even get here? I'm driving my car and like, I don't remember driving to the bank, but I'm at the bank. Or I don't even remember the commute home from work. I remember being at work and now I know I'm at home, but like what happened? Or when you're doing things around the house and not really thinking about it. So if you're finding yourself on autopilot, then that might be a clue that you are headed towards burnout. And we want to pay attention to that because we want to get to the point where we can see burnout coming, right? There are some things that I notice in myself. And when these things start to happen, then I know I'm probably headed straight towards burnout. I need to either do some maintenance things, or I need to try to find a time where I can take a break sometime soon in the next few weeks. But I have learned to be in tune with myself enough to know when certain things start to shift, then it's probably because I'm kind of exhausted or because I have been neglecting myself in some of these different ways that we're talking about. And so the way to combat this feeling of being on autopilot and like just going through the motions, sometimes we get in these zones where it's like you look up and 3 days have passed and like, what happened? Or why is this month going by so quickly? Because we're just going through the motions. And so a really good way to combat that is with mindfulness. Mindfulness is really just a fancy way of saying be present in the moment, finding ways to be present in the moment. But it's important to learn to be more present with yourself so that you can be more aware of your needs. When we're on autopilot and when we're just like going through the motions, we're not tuned in to how our body is feeling, how we're doing mentally or emotionally. We're not really tuned into the things that we might need in that moment because we're not taking the time to check in with ourselves because there are other important things that are happening. So I don't know if you've never had a panic attack like out of nowhere, right? Then you may not know what I'm talking about. But when you go so long without checking in with yourself, your body is going to tell you, like, you're going to start breaking down. And sometimes the way that happens is like through a panic attack, right? And you're like, wait, what's going on? How come I can't breathe? How come, why is my vision getting blurry? Like, why am I about to start hyperventilating? Why do I all of a sudden feel this tightness in my breath? Your body is going to tell you, like, friend, we need to sit down. Something's been missing, right? And maybe you haven't eaten that day or in a couple of days. Maybe you're dehydrated. Maybe you're sleep deprived. Maybe your stress and anxiety has gotten so high, but you're not even aware of it. So if we don't take the time to check in with ourselves, then we don't know what we need and we don't know how to take care of ourselves. All right, now I need to talk to my people pleasers for a second. I know earlier we were talking about whether or not self-care is selfish, and I want to go back to that because I know that for those of us who are recovering people pleasers or maybe still in our people pleasing era, we have a really hard time thinking about ourselves as important as other people, as worthy as other people, or as a priority. And we feel very, very selfish for doing that. We place a lot of our value in caring for other people rather than for ourselves. And so one of the myths about self-care is that it's selfish and that we should be paying more attention to other people than we are to ourselves. To that I say, if Jesus needed to rest, if it was okay for him to rest, then why can't you? Because I know you don't think that you better than Jesus. He was 100% human. He was 100% man and 100% God. He rested. So, like, where does that come from? You know? Now, I know, making other people happy makes you happy. I can hear it now, right? Like, I feel good when I can make other people feel good. I know. And you can still do that. You can still make other people happy. There's this thought. One of the other myths and like why this is really hard for some of us is because we feel like I can either take care of myself or I can take care of you. If I'm taking care of myself, then I'm neglecting you, right? It's this either or, it's this black and white thinking. But what if I told you it can be, I can take care of my needs and yours, right? Maybe it's, I take care of my needs so that I can take care of yours. It does not have to be either or. Sometimes we feel like a bad person for thinking about ourselves and thinking about what we need. We feel like a bad person for doing that. But I think it's because there's this like black or white, either or, like I can't do both. But there's room for both. Multiple things can be true at once. It can be true that we are here to serve other people, and it can be true that we also need to serve ourselves. It doesn't have to be either or. We need to be able to make space for both. This kind of either or and the black or white thinking, it leads us to a lot of self-neglect. And God is not happy with that either. Because when you neglect yourself, then you are not able to give him as much. You're not able to do as much for him or to carry out his will for your life when you're neglecting yourself. We've all been here before, having a hard time getting up to go to church on Sunday because we're tired. We didn't get enough sleep. Or we're in church, but you can't really pay attention because you're so irritated and frustrated about what's going on. Or you're distracted because you're thinking about work so much. Or you're thinking about fighting with your spouse or your significant other. Or maybe there is a ministry that you're a part of, but you you're working so much overtime that like you're skipping these meetings. Or you were going to go out and feed the homeless, but you couldn't because you overslept because you're sleep deprived. So if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not handling your business, how can you handle God's business? Put it in those terms, maybe you sit on that one for a little while. So first, you can't serve somebody else if you're not serving yourself. There's room for both, but also you cannot handle God's business if you can't handle your business. How is he going to be able to trust you with more? How is he going to be able to enlarge your territory if you're not being a good steward over what he has given you now? And taking care of yourself is a part of being a good steward. Your body is a temple, and we're going to talk about that some more. But everything that he's given you, your peace of mind, your intellect, your capacity, everything that God has given you, you have a responsibility to steward correctly and responsibly. And if we're neglecting it, if you are neglecting the things that God has given you to be a steward over, then he's not pleased with that either. Remember that you are God's creation. So if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're not taking care of God's creation. Okay? So either way you slice it, it is absolutely necessary that you make space to take care of yourself and your own needs. That's it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear no more about I don't have time for self-care or there's more important things that are happening. I don't want to hear it. Okay? There's space. We make space for all of the other things that are important in our life. We make space for other important events for other people. We make space for work projects and events. We make space for the things that matter. And if you are not making space for yourself, then what you're communicating to yourself, to God, and to everyone else is that you don't matter. And that's not true. You can't convince me that it is. I know it sounds really overwhelming to think about taking care of 8 different areas of your life all at once. And you don't have to. It doesn't really work like that. There will be times when one cup is full and the other is empty, or one is half full and one is only 3/4 of the way full. There are different seasons in life require different things from you, right? There are different priorities in different seasons of life. So everything is not as urgent all at once. There are some seasons where work is going to be priority. There are some seasons where family and relationships are going to be priority, right? So while they're all important, they kind of shift in priority. So you don't have to think about all of them every single day, all at once. That is kind of overwhelming, but they're all things that contribute to your overall wellness and well-being. Sometimes you might just be in maintenance mode in one area or another. That's the goal. That's the goal of a lot of this preventative self-care, is to get to a place where you're kind of in maintenance mode, right? Not really in crisis, not completely empty, may not be all the way full, but full enough to be productive in that area. And that's okay. Different areas need different things. So while you're probably doing something to promote your physical wellness every day, like eating, sleeping, hydrating, you should be at least. Where's your water? Right now, go get some water. Because I know you're dehydrated. Okay? Mine's right here. Go get your water. So while we're doing something every day to promote our physical well-being, we may not need to put as much effort into our social needs, right? Those maybe are not as frequent. So understand that as well, that different areas need different things, are not always as frequent, right? So that helps us too. It makes it a little bit more manageable. And that's probably also why we pay more attention to some areas than the other, because they have more frequent needs. And that's okay, right? So maybe you're paying more attention to those. They need, more frequent needs. And every once in a while, you check in with how you're doing socially, or you get together with friends like once a month or something, instead of having to get together every day or once a week. Like you need different things to be well in all those different areas. So you're not doing everything all at once every single day. That's not reasonable. That's not realistic. And that's not what we're saying here. But no one can make that distinction for you, right? So I'm going to give y'all some homework. I want you to do a bit of a self-care assessment, because only you can say like what needs you have in different areas and how frequent all of those are, because it's going to be different for you than it is for me, right? So I want you to make a list of all 8 of these categories of wellness. I'll give them to you again. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, environmental, recreational, and professional. Okay. So after you've written that down, I want you to think about when you feel your best in each category. Okay. When do you feel that you are at your healthiest in each of those categories? Physical is talking about your body. When does your body feel the best? When does your body feel the healthiest? Mental, when do you have the most mental clarity, right? Or when do you have the most focus? Emotional, when are you the most even keeled or in tune with your emotional needs, right? When are you maybe the happiest or maybe the most neutral, right? If you tend to slump into a depression, like when are you the least depressed? That's going to be different for everyone. So that's emotional. Spiritual, when do you feel the closest to God? When do you feel strongest spiritually? And what contributes to that? Social, When do you feel healthiest in your social relationships, whether that be platonic or romantic? What makes you feel healthiest or the best in those relationships and in that way? Environmental. Think about your physical space, right? When do you feel the best? When does your physical space feed you and fuel you the most? Is it when there's less clutter? Is it when your plants are doing well? Is it when you have fresh sheets on the bed, like your environmental space? Recreational, think about the ways that you have fun, the things that you do to have fun, whether that be hobbies or activities, going to the movies. I'm a park girl myself. I really haven't found my go-to parks out here yet. But when I was back in California, I always had some blankets in my trunk because I was known to just go to a park and have a little picnic. Go to the park, lay down in the sunshine, right? Like, what are the recreational activities, things that that allow you to have fun? Like, when do you get to let your inner child out, right? And then professional, when do you feel the best at work? Work takes up a big chunk of our time, a big chunk of our life. We spend a lot of time and energy and resources there. So what makes you feel the best at work? Is that when you have professional boundaries? Is that when you limit how many meetings you have on your calendar in one day? What is it? What is it that makes you feel the best in your workspace or in your work life? Okay. So that's your homework. I want you to do a self-care assessment. When do you feel the best in each of those areas? What are the things, the activities, or the actions that contribute to feeling your best in each of those areas? Now, this is not to give you a giant to-do list, but this is to help you see that there are so many different things that contribute to your wellness, which is a good thing because, like we said earlier, you're not always going to have an extra chunk of time. So maybe getting a massage might help you feel better, like physically and mentally, but you can't always do that. So you need a list of other things that you can do on a regular basis. Maybe also what makes you feel good mentally is listening to some instrumental jazz, right? Maybe listening to some music that helps you focus. Maybe that's something that also makes you feel good mentally, but you can do that anytime. You don't have to wait until you got some PTO for that or until you have a long weekend for that. So it's important to see that there are so many different ways to tend to your personal wellness, your overall wellness, without having to completely shut down. That's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid the shutdown for so many of us. When we feel tired or burnt out or exhausted, our go-to is just to shut out the whole world, just to isolate. I'm guilty of this myself, just to isolate, shut everything out, not do anything unless it has to do with paying my bills or getting the bills paid, like nothing else. We feel like we just want to shut the whole world out. But that's not always healthy for us. And we want to be able to take care of ourselves without having to get to that point. So do your self-care assessment. Think about, when do I feel the best in each of these areas? What contributes to feeling the best in each of these areas? And how frequently do I need to do some of these things? So it's like, how many steps was that? Like a 3 or 4 step process. And that's going to help you to create your personal, individualized self-care plan. Everyone's self-care looks different. We all have different needs. So what works for somebody else may not work for you. And that's okay too. We don't want to get into the habit of comparison here. Y'all already know how we feel about comparison over here, okay? It's dangerous. It's the thief of joy. So if you are expecting your self-care to look like someone else's, and then you are shaming yourself because it doesn't look that way, then now you are just draining yourself more instead of nourishing yourself. And that's counterproductive. That's not what we're here to do. So create your personalized self-care plan and think about how it can fit into your life. Because that's the thing too. Somebody else might have more space or more time, so they can do more things on a regular basis. But if you don't have that same amount of time or energy, you cannot expect yourself to do all the same things that they do. That's just not realistic. And we need to stay grounded in reality here. If it's helpful for you, while you're doing your self-care assessment or even after, maybe pull out a calendar and think about how frequently you can reasonably do some of these important things. There are some things that need to be done every day, like brushing your teeth, drinking some water, getting some sleep, eating. There are some things that maybe you can do once a week or a couple of times a week, right? Like maybe you only go to the gym a few times a week, or maybe there's a class that you want to take and it happens once a week. So like once a week you can go to your pottery class, right? And then there are things that maybe you want to do every few weeks or like once a month. Maybe you want to go on at least one hike a month, something like that. Put it on that calendar. Put it on that calendar and treat it like you have a meeting with someone else. When we have plans with somebody else, we're not going to cancel them, but we cancel on ourselves all of the time, right? Like, I need to get back on my solo dating. I had good intentions of taking myself on a date or doing something nice for myself at least 2 or 3 times a month. Ask me how many times I've done that since 2024 started. I think it's probably 0. That's really bad. Hey, that's bad. But that's why it's so important that we put the things on our calendar. Because if it's on my calendar, I'm blocking that time off. So put it on your calendar, block it off. And if someone asks, hey, are you busy on Saturday? If your pedicure is on there, if your hike is on there, then you're actually busy. You actually already have plans. And you need to start prioritizing yourself and your plans with yourself like you do with other people. So you can say, actually, I'm busy in the morning, but I'm free at this time. That's how you make room for both. Okay. So make your self-care. You do your assessment. Get your list of things that can help you to stay well and that can contribute to your overall wellness, and then put them in the calendar. Now, here's a disclaimer. All the things are not going to be fun. Everything that's good for you is not always fun. I have learned to appreciate the mornings over the past couple of years, but I'm not a morning person. Okay. Waking up early, I hate it. Y'all don't understand. Waking up early, I hate it. But I find that I am more productive in the morning and that I am clear-headed in the morning. So I'm learning to appreciate the mornings. And I think that's what's turning me into a morning person. That doesn't even feel right to say. That maybe that's what it means to be a morning person. Maybe it doesn't mean that you like mornings, but I have a new appreciation for them. Anyway, that's an example of something that is good for me that I try to do pretty regularly, even though it's not fun, it's not exciting, and it's a struggle about every single day. But it's good for me. Exercise, I've never really enjoyed it, but I do it regularly or semi-regularly because it's good for me. I also find other ways to incorporate movement into my day so that the only way that I move my body is not always at the gym. So everything that's good for you is not going to be fun, but that doesn't mean that it's not good for you. So there's that disclaimer, okay? If you feel the best physically when you get a good night's sleep, when you get your 7 hours, you give yourself a bedtime and try to start working towards sticking to it. I know that's a hard one, but even if you don't have 100% success rate, trying to incorporate something more is going to help you because it keeps it on your mind. Let's say you are trying to give yourself a bedtime, right? But if you usually go to bed at 3 a.m., you're not going to be able to start going to bed at 10 p.m. tomorrow just because you say it today. That's just not a real thing. But if you usually go to bed at 3 a.m. and you say, okay, let me try to get to bed like closer to maybe 12 or 1 a.m., then that's like baby steps moving towards it, right? Even if, let's say throughout the next week, you're only able to do that twice. Don't get mad at yourself because you weren't able to do it every day. Say, okay, that was 2 more days than I was able to do it last week. And now it's on your mind more. So maybe you're not going to bed at 12, but you're going to bed at 2 instead of 3. So we need to look for small steps in progress. Okay. There is no, let's not bring the perfectionism into this. It's crazy how perfectionism really seeps into like every part of our life, even in how we take care of ourselves. So it's not realistic to think that you'll be able to incorporate something every single day starting tomorrow if it's not something that you do now already. So some of these things can be aspirational and we want to work towards doing them every day or every week, but start with where you are and just start working towards these things. Having them on your mind more is helpful even because it's nudging you in the right direction. And sometimes all we need is a little nudge. So give yourself some grace in working towards some of these things that maybe aren't the most fun or the easiest, but you know that they're good for you. Being committed to your wellness is not always going to be fun, but it will always be necessary. Okay. That's going to lead us into our scripture for the day. Let's see what the word has to say about some of this. We have another crowd favorite today. 1 Corinthians 3:16-17. It says, "Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is sacred and you together are that temple." It's really important that we understand the mind, body, spirit connection. They all work together. Our body is God's temple, but so is our mind. So is our heart, our home, our relationships, and all the fruit that we produce. The Holy Spirit dwells in you. So think about what kind of dwelling place he deserves. Not just physically, but also dwelling in your mind and in your heart and in your home and in your relationships. You are God's temple. You are the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. And we want to make sure that the Holy Spirit has a dwelling place that is fit and that is clear. We want to give him, we don't want him to have to work through a bunch of clutter, right? If that dwelling place is super cluttered and dirty, if that dwelling place is cluttered, dark, depleted, funky, all of that, do you think that it's going to be harder or easier to connect with the Holy Spirit? If you got to work through all this other clutter, do you think that it's going to be harder or easier to connect with the Holy Spirit and to give him the space that he needs to work in you and through you? Think about it that way. I know we hear that verse a lot, like your body is a temple. Okay, sure, eat healthy, drink water, work out, get enough sleep. But beyond that, you are the temple. And so we want to give the Spirit a dwelling place that will promote the will of God. One of the ways that we want to try to do that is when you're doing your self-care assessment, when you're thinking about all 8 of these areas of wellness, think about how you can try to center God in each of those areas as well. Or think about whether there is anything that's currently hindering your connection with God in any of those areas. That's an important part of this as well. I know that we listed those 8, and the order that I listed them in does not need to be the order that you prioritize them in. Okay? For me, my spiritual wellness has to be number 1. I have learned that about myself. So maybe that's a part of it too, is prioritizing these areas of wellness. If you're off in one, are you off in all the other ones? Right? So if there is anything in any of those areas of wellness that's hindering you from being pleasing to God, then that's another conversation to have altogether. Okay? So beyond just your body, you are the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. We want to give him a dwelling place that he's worthy of. And we want to give him a dwelling place that will allow the room for the will of God. All right. So wrapping up here, let's get to our question for the week. This is a good one, y'all. This is a juicy one. Just as a reminder, if you have a question that you want answered on the show, you can send me an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com. You can send me a DM at therapyandprayer on Instagram, on TikTok. If you're watching here on YouTube, then you can put it in the comments. So there's lots of different ways. If you have a question, let me know. I want to answer it. Okay. All right. So today's question: how do you have boundaries while also being a servant and minister of Christ? I deal with a confused mind on how to live this Christian life of service and still have boundaries. We are called to love one another and esteem each other higher than ourselves. But what if people are taking advantage of your willingness and kindness? Now, we probably could and may still at some point do a whole episode on boundaries because there is a lot that I could say about it. But this is something that comes up a lot, I think, in the same way that as Christians, sometimes we struggle with the concept of self-care because we feel like it demotes other people. We have the same kind of struggle when it comes to boundaries because we feel like by asserting our boundaries, we are demeaning or demoting other people. So what I'll say to that is boundaries are about finding a way to serve others without completely depleting ourselves, without completely disregarding ourselves. It's finding a way to serve others while still caring for yourself. Now, when the Bible speaks about esteeming others highly and higher than ourselves, it's speaking about humility. And essentially it's saying, don't think that you're better than other people because you're not. If anything, think that other people are better, like put them on a pedestal, right? But that gets misconstrued a lot and it makes us feel like we should not think about ourselves. But we should not think of ourselves more highly than we think of other people. We are not more worthy or more important than anyone else. And if everyone has that mindset, then no one is more important than anyone else, right? Meaning that no one else is more important than you either, right? We're all on the same playing field here. So that verse is really speaking to the humility that we need to have as Christians. But it doesn't mean that you should care about other people instead of caring about yourself. Now, part of the way that we get taken advantage of is when we submit to that mindset that says, I need to take care of your needs instead of taking care of mine. And for those of us who are like very compassionate and loving and giving, and we want to serve, other people can see that and will take advantage of that at times, which is why it can be important to have boundaries. Now, when we think about the word boundaries, we think about saying no. Like that's what always comes up first. And that can feel very harsh. But boundaries are not just about saying no. Essentially, they are when you are creating a standard for yourself on how you are going to be able to engage with someone or navigate a specific relationship without hurting yourself. That's what that means. A boundary is not what you're asking someone else to do or not do. It's the way that you are committing to showing up in this relationship in a way that will still allow your needs to be met. That's it. We want to be able to engage with other people without it being to our own detriment. And that's what happens a lot of the time. Like we're so sacrificing, and we are prioritizing and thinking about other people so much so that we end up hurting ourselves in the process. And so boundaries are a protective factor so that I can find a way to engage with you and help you and show up for you without neglecting myself. It's not about cutting people out of your life or keeping people out of your life. Now, sometimes it might come to that, and we'll have to get to that another time. But that's not what it's about. Boundaries is another one of those buzzwords that we don't completely understand. But we have boundaries for the relationships that we want to keep. We have boundaries in relationships that we care about. We're saying, listen, I love you and I want to be able to continue to be in relationship with you, but I cannot do that if I am being depleted and if I'm continuing to be hurt. I'm not going to be able to show up in this relationship at all. So in order for me to show up in this relationship, I need to be able to do it without being hurt in the process. And these are some of the things that I have to put in place in order to do that. There's a verse that says we should carry one another's burdens, but later on in that same passage, it also says that each one must carry their own load. And I heard something about the difference between a burden and a load. Think about I'm thinking about like a load of laundry, right? You have a load of laundry and you have all that fits into the basket, and then you have excess that doesn't fit into the basket, right? So the excess, think about that as the burden. So we want to be able to show up and help and support our brothers and sisters when they're carrying so much that there's an excess, and when they're carrying so much that they're having a hard time maybe carrying all of it. And we want to help them with that excess. If that means giving you some extra support, if that means like stepping in and helping you do some school drop-offs and pickups, and sure. But we are not responsible for other people's loads. We are not responsible for handling other people's business. But sometimes people will either intentionally or unintentionally take advantage of that kindness and will allow you to make yourself responsible for them and for their business. And if you're responsible for someone else's business, then who's responsible for yours? So that's why boundaries are important. And that's how we can navigate them as Christians. We have boundaries so that we can continue showing up in ways that will not completely deplete us. Now, if you have some manipulative people in your life, then that's when we get into another conversation about the types of relationships that are healthy for us to have versus those that we might need to reassess and decide whether or not it's healthy to keep them close at all. All right. Yeah, we're going to have to do a boundaries episode. Stay tuned. That's coming. But that's kind of my short answer to that about how we can have boundaries as Christians. You can still serve other people and you can serve yourself. Okay. We ought to help one another when and where we can, but we cannot make ourselves responsible for another person's well-being, because you have to be responsible for your own. Okay. All right. That's all I got for y'all. I don't know how long this was, but it feels like it was short, but that's okay. Thank you so much for listening. I love you so much, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Therapy and Prayer. Make sure you're subscribed and following wherever you listen to podcasts, and if the Spirit moves you, go ahead and leave us a review. If you want to submit a question to be answered on this show, send us an email at therapyandprayer@gmail.com, and make sure you're following us on TikTok at Therapy and Prayer. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you soon.